All right, we were in the middle of putting on some doors. Let's do that. That should be pretty easy. Let's look at our picture real quick. Okay, so we just have doors going each direction. Simple piece of hardware. And then we just really need to do the legs, and we're there. It's a pretty simple piece of furniture to get started on, really. No organic shapes, everything is hard lines. But it's a great way to explore all the different poly tools. And I'm using spline tools to start my creations as well. So this is just a rectangle, and turn off the enable rendering in viewport and in renderer so that it's just a spline. And then there's a couple different things you can do here. You can extrude it, or you can put a normal modifier on it. Of course, you may not have this tool panel, but those are all found in the modify panel. Let's go in here and put a normal. Okay, we don't want to flip the normal, we want it to stay that side, but that just turns it into a shape. You could actually just right click on a rectangle and convert to edit poly as well. But then once it's just a face sitting there in space, we can put a shell on it, and there's our door, right? We also could have just extruded the rectangle to make a door, but either way, let's just use that because it looks great. Now it needs to fit into this groove that we made here, and I'm now looking at that thinking the groove is not thick enough. So what we can do with that is, of course, just scale it. You could go into the vertice sub-object mode here and select the vertices you want and kind of stretch them over. I'm just going to scale it in sub-object mode in the x-axis only, like that. And then move it over into place. Make sure that door is thick enough. That looks thick enough. Okay, so let's turn this door into an edit poly. Now we can just kind of make it the exact size we need and just put it into there. It can be a little bit smaller maybe, like so that it doesn't fit absolutely tight into that groove, because that wouldn't be right. Move it in the y-axis down, make sure it's just sitting right in there. Perfect. And we can again put those micro chamfers on the edge. Let's do that just for consistency. Again, we went to the face, selected the face, and then control to the edges to select all the edges that were connected to that face. Okay, just the slightest of chamfers. And then we will hold down shift while we copy this guy to there, and it should be an instance. Actually, you know what? It's probably not an instance. Well, maybe it is. I'm trying to figure out how it would work here in the center. You're not going to have a gap there. So this would be a little longer than to the halfway mark. And since these are instances, that one now just got longer over there. So if we just move that down like so, now we have some overlap there right in the center, which I think is exactly how it would work. There you go, we've got it sitting in a track. If anything, you could make that a little thicker, this whole track a little thicker and the doors a little thicker. But I think it's okay for now. We'll have to see when we render, I guess. Now, the hardware is luckily super simple. You'll find that modern furniture is oftentimes much easier to model than traditional furniture because there's not a bunch of curves and things like that on it. Let's check this line right here to make sure that's right. Yep, that's right. The drawer goes right up to it. Okay, so the hardware can be very simple. We could just probably make that with splines. Let's take one of these doors to be right about there. And we'll just make a spline coming out like that. Let's look at it from the other view. Well, let's leave it down here so we can see it. And just go to the modify of that spline and enable it in renderer. Radial, of course. Make it small. Something like that. And then we can convert that to edit poly and take that as an element, sub-object. Copy it up. And then let's move it out here, holding down shift to create a new element, rotating it 90. And now take it, move those vertices up, move those vertices down. And this handle is actually bigger in radius than these little stems that hold it on. So again, in just the XY axis, we will scale like that. Make sure and scale in sub-object mode. Wouldn't work otherwise. Again, move that into place so that they're definitely overlapping. We've got a nice little overlap there. Now in these ones, there's definitely a beveled edge. So we can do that by just selecting the face, holding Control. Actually, when you take a spline to create your polygons, it will get these faces down here that you don't want. So actually, it would have been better to do it as a circle extruded because that makes a cleaner end cap. I just went in there and selected those edges and hit remove, but that may or may not be clean when we try to do our bevel. I'll show you what I mean. Actually, so this time let's do, instead of bevel, instead of chamfer, we are going to use bevel. So let's just up and in for our bevel. Okay, and that should have happened on the bottom face as well. So that's perfect. So we could have selected all those edges and did a chamfer, but instead we just selected a face and did a bevel, and it's nice and clean. Perfect. Now we move this handle into place, and we can see that it's already too small because I am not looking at reference dimensions. I'm just kind of eyeballing things, and that makes it too small. It's actually a pretty hefty little piece of hardware there. So let's actually just scale the whole thing up in sub-object mode. Make sure we're scaling in all directions here. It's actually more like that, isn't it? And then actually, let's see. Let's make sure the radius is right, and then we can stretch the height of the whole thing. Like that. Let's move these closer to the ends a little bit. There. So there that is. Let's move it out so that it's at the right place. Right about there. That looks close to correct, I think. Yeah, it's probably a little squattier than that. So let's make it a little squattier. Probably right there is what that looks like to me. And obviously, if you have two monitors, I would suggest putting the piece of furniture up on your other monitor so you can just look at it while you're building. I don't have that luxury while I'm recording a screen. Okay, actually no, we don't want to copy that in sub-object mode. We want to copy it just as an object. Yes, just like this, and make it an instance. Put it over here, move it into place like that. Okay, if anything, those could afford to be a little beefier, but for now, we're going to accept that. And yay, we've got the same hardware on the drawers as well, so that becomes very easy for us, doesn't it? Small victories, especially when you're on deadline and under budget, or under the pressure of a budget, I should say. Little things like that are great. Because building furniture can be one of the most time-consuming things that you do. It's also one of the most fun, but it can kill a budget real quick if you're doing a bunch of custom furniture. Okay, we've got all this. Let's cut to the legs. Okay, on the legs, these are going to be really simple. It's actually just a kind of a cylindrical leg at an angle and then just boards attaching it. So that's very easy. Let's create one and then instance it around. It'll be a circle about that size, not enabled for rendering. Get it up here. We'll just do a basic extrude on it in the negative direction. Convert it to edit poly. Our old friend poly. Okay, move the vertices up to the floor height. And then we're going to take those same vertices and scale them down in the X and Y direction. Like that. Let's make sure that looks right. That's a little too tapered. Something like that. Okay, and there's other ways to do this. You can make a cylinder and put a taper modifier on it. You could do that kind of stuff. That seems way more tedious to me. That's why I love these poly tools, because it just makes things quick and easy. This definitely has a chamfer on it, and we'll actually make it probably multiple chamfers to make it a little bit kind of rounded like that. So just turn up the chamfer edges to 3. Check mark. There we go. I think that's about right for that thing. Now, it just has a rotation on it. Fortunately, our pivot is in the exact right spot to rotate it like this, right? If it wasn't, then you could go into this tab here and go to pivot, affect pivot only. Then you could move it. So if you wanted to rotate it from here, you could do that, right? Rotate around the pivot. Make sure that you're in use pivot point center as your rotation point. But we actually want the pivot there, and we can rotate like that, and we can rotate like that. So it rotates in two directions, like so. The only problem is that now it doesn't quite intersect at the top. So let's actually, well, let's look at how this works here. Yeah, I've got too much tapering going on, and it's just kind of flat on the bottom. It's not actually a rotated thing. So let's undo that. This thing is looking too thick, first of all. It's much more slim. And I think it's got more of a shoulder on it. Let's do one line here like this. Scale that one out. I think it's more shaped like that. And then you can either, let's see, you can do a big chamfer on this to smooth it out. Like that. That's good. You could also do a turbo smooth on this to make it really, really smooth. Turbo smooth. But then you'd have to address the edges up at the top, which would be the easiest way to do that would be to just remove that face up there. Then the turbo smooth won't try to round that corner, and it'll just stay flat like that. Okay, now you've got a really high poly object, and it's going to look really smooth. And it's going to be hard to work with because it's got so many faces. So let's actually take that off. And I think what we could do here, how about we look at a FFD modifier for this? That'd be a pretty good modifier to use. Instead of rotating it, it actually kind of like slides to the side. So what we can do is an FFD modifier, 4x4x4 is fine. And what this does is transform things without using transform. So we go to the control points, and you can take those control points and kind of slide this thing over. So let's do that for each part of this. Make sure it's kind of a straight line coming down. Now from the other side, we will do the same thing. Make sure it's going out about the same amount. You can see how that does a nice little kind of soft transform on our object. This wants to be straight. So watch your control points and make sure they're coming down straight. I've got kind of a little shift in there, which I don't want. That's about right. And that's about right. Okay, you can convert that to edit poly now, or you can leave it there so you can come back to it later. I'll just convert it. Does that look right? It looks close. Maybe it looks a little scrawny for this big thing that it's holding up. Maybe because I changed the proportions of the furniture, I should have made this leg a little bigger too. Or maybe we need to put a center leg in there, but that doesn't really fit the style. Okay, so what I can do is just kind of scale it up in just the X and Y like that. And that definitely looks better. Okay. We will accept that. Some little weirdness going on here. I don't really like the shape. I would go back and remake it if this was for a final project, but you guys have seen the tools, so we're going to move on. And I think it'll still look really good in the render. It's more about demonstrating than making a perfect project here. Okay, now I'm just instancing them around, mirroring them. No clone for the mirror because I've already got the clones. Let's make sure we get this distance right here by looking at the image. Yeah, it's pretty far off the edge. One thing I have that's not going well for me is that these legs are long in proportion to the overall height of the piece of furniture. So I should have actually exaggerated these legs up, but because of the shape of my buffet, it doesn't really look the same. I could adjust that by shifting all this up, but I'm not going to do that because it's not essential to the course. If we start rendering and I'm looking at it thinking that looks really weird, then it is essential to the course and we'll go back and fix it. But when you're eyeballing furniture, this is kind of the problems that you run into. It's making sure those proportions get just right. And I'm also adjusting the piece of furniture to fit my room, which means I have to kind of eyeball the proportions and see if they look right or not. Okay, just building these last little pieces here. We'll finish this up by just doing some rectangles and extruding. Make that into an edit poly. Need one back here too. Actually, that should be an instance, of course. Okay, I'm going to finish this up, and in the next video, we'll move on to the next thing.